In 1972, a plane crash landed in the Florida Everglades, killing almost two-thirds of the people on board, including the captain, yet that very same captain would still be on board future flights. But how? If you watch to the end of this video, it will blow your mind, so find out more in this video, and please subscribe, thank you. Let's start with the background. On December 29, 1972, 55-year-old Captain Bob Albin was piloting Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a large Lockheed TriStar, from New York JFK to Miami. Captain Bob was highly experienced, and had accumulated almost 30,000 hours of flying time over 32 years. Alongside Bob was 39-year-old co-pilot Bert Stockstill, and 51-year-old flight engineer Don Repo, both of whom also had great experience. Whilst these three individuals were due to be the only persons in the cockpit, 47-year-old Angelo Donadio, a technical officer, joined them as a non-revenue passenger that day in order to get to his destination. Bob left JFK Airport on Flight 401 at 21:20 local time, with 13 crew members and 163 passengers aboard. For just over 2 hours into the flight, everything was going to plan, until First Officer Bert attempted to deploy the plane's landing gear for their approach into Miami. The landing gear indicator advised Bert that the front landing gear had not locked into place, on the two rear sets of wheels. Being a new plane, members of the cockpit assumed this to be a faulty or burned-out light bulb, and would retract the gear, and redeploy it again, which they did, however the same issue arose. Bob notified air traffic control, and the plane headed out to the Florida Everglades to see if they could rectify the problem, out of harm's way of other air traffic. The plane then circled at 2,000 feet, whilst Second Officer Don Repo went below the flight deck to verify the front landing gear was locked into place. Pilot Bob put the plane on autopilot to assist his colleagues, however when he left his seat, he must have nudged the steering column, which effectively disabled the autopilot. The plane continued to maintain flight level for a minute or so, then gradually descended to 100 feet. A warning sounded in the cockpit, but safe in the knowledge the autopilot was on, the noise was ignored, as the descent was so gradual it would not have been noticeable. In the end, it was too late, and the jetliner careered into the Everglades, west-northwest of Miami, 19 miles from the intended runway. The plane made trails through sawgrass, before breaking up. There were 101 fatalities, and if the plane hadn't crashed into the Everglades, this number could have been a lot higher. All three of the cockpit members died, leaving only Angelo Donadio alive from that section of the plane. 2 of the 10 flight attendants sadly died, along with 96 of the 163 passengers on board. Not far from the crash site, airboat pilot Bud Marquis and friend Ray Dickinson are frog giggling in the Everglades. They had witnessed the crash and rushed over to search for any survivors. They helped as many people as they could, but the most part of the damage had already been done, and being in such swampy water, it made it difficult for rescue teams to get on the ground. The NTSB concluded that pilot error was the probable cause, as the autopilot had been inadvertently switched off from altitude hold, and was the definitive catalyst that led to the crash, despite the nose landing gear warning light error. Now things start to get really spooky, as Eastern Airlines Flight 401 had not nose-dived into the ground, but gradually descended into swampy waters. It presented an option for the airline to recycle certain parts of the plane. Once salvaged, cleaned up, and tested, these parts were redistributed to other planes within their fleet. One such plane was Eastern Airlines Flight 318. For the next 3 years, dozens, if not hundreds of eyewitnesses, would see Captain Bob Loft and flight engineer Don Repo on board multiple flights, so much so, that Eastern's management issued a memo advising employees that they could be dismissed if they spoke about what they saw, as this was bad for business. Starting with Don Repo, an Eastern Airlines captain claims to have seen his ghost on a plane, and advised him that there was an issue with the plane before vanishing, leading the captain to make an emergency landing. After being ridiculed for this, the previously undetected, yet very specific engine malfunction the captain was advised of by Repo, turned out to be true following an inspection. As for Bob Loft, these incidents will have you tingling. In New Jersey, Eastern Airlines Flight 318, still containing a part from Flight 401, was getting ready for its flight to Miami. Checks had been carried out, and a stewardess began undertaking a head count. Strangely enough, there was one too many people on board the plane, forcing a recount, which only arrived at the same result. The problem soon became clear, when the attendant noticed an Eastern Airlines captain sitting in first class that wasn't on the manifest. She didn't recognize him and assumed he must be a non-revenue passenger, or deadheader as they were known, as he was wearing the airline uniform. This was not an uncommon practice in the 1970s. The attendant approached the unknown captain and raised this very question in order to complete her checks. Nevertheless, the captain ignored her and stared straight ahead. She asked the man again if he was deadheading, and once again, the man continued to stare into the distance, as if he was incoherent, as her request could be heard by passengers, who could also see the captain she was talking to. A colleague of the attendant could see that there may be a problem, and went over to ask the man the same question, and again, he also ignored her too. The attendants didn't know what to do, so one went to fetch the captain, whilst the other waited with the man. The silent captain remained seated, and passengers were baffled as to why the man refused to communicate with the airline staff. The captain of the flight left the cockpit in a bid to talk to the man, who was still refusing to respond. The captain of the flight looked the silent captain in the eyes in order to get a better look at him and raise his attention. In utter amazement, the flight's captain flings backwards and identifies that the man in the seat is none other than Bob Loft. The captain had known Bob very well. Within moments of this happening, the silent captain that was seemingly Bob Loft vanished into thin air, right in front of several people's eyes. Passengers began screaming, and airline staff attempted to calm them down. Fearing their vision was playing tricks on them, a hunt of the plane began to find the man, but after an hour, he was nowhere to be found. Further spooky incidents were referenced over the next 2 years, including an Eastern airline executive and a catering company, all on flights that had a part of Flight 401 on them, and contained sightings of Bob Loft and Don Repo, which were entered into a record, with access rescinded at a later date. In 1975, all of the creepy sightings suddenly came to an end when Eastern Airlines, who incidentally refuted all of these bizarre sightings, removed all the parts on their fleet of planes that was once on crashed Flight 401 without explanation. Do you have an opinion on this? If so, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe. Thank you.